What's up, everybody? Blessed be. My name is Manon, and you're watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. Okay, this episode of Witch in the Working is going to be pretty intense. For the first time as a witch of 30 years plus, I'm going to attempt to explain and teach you how I perform divination and channel spirit during circles and gatherings when it's called for. This is something that can take years to develop, as it did myself, and for others it can be a lot quicker, even overnight. Even still, others are even born with this ability and just have a hard time understanding it or even coping with it, depending on their circumstances. This is definitely going to be a from the heart video, as most of what I'm going to attempt to share with you isn't really in books, and it's even said that this is something that can't really be taught, but more has to ultimately just happen and be experienced. Well, I tend to think I can at least get you down going on the right path, so without further ado, roll the intro. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, where to even start? There are many skills that go into witchcraft, most of which are very mysterious and not easily explained. This is why our craft is in the shadows, as much of what we do is, well, magical in essence. Now, as most of you know, I'm not talking about the David Blaine stage magician type of magic, but the type of magic that has been tugging at our souls for lifetimes and longs to reach out of ourselves and affect the living world around us by creating change and conformity with our will. The type of magic that bonds a parent to a child, whereas in moments of desperation and intense feeling, one picks up on the other's sensitivity from miles away with no scientific explanation. The type of magic that allows a witch who's desperately and passionately longing for life-giving rain to go outside and collaborate with the elements and trade with her will and intent to cause the heavens to burst forth their bounty of liquid sustenance, when in fact there was not a sign of a scalding cloud in sight just hours before. Now, there's so much involved in magic and witchcraft, and so many different magic techniques and reasons for performing magic, but this last magic I speak of is what I would like to present to you today. The kind of magic that allows one to rest at a clearing within a forest, nothing but soil and life beneath them, pounding of the earth's rhythms coursing through their veins, with each heartbeat in sync with the drumming of life itself, gods and spirits all joining in a chorus, creating a music that is more overwhelming and enchanting than any piece of music heard by man's ears throughout history. In sync, frozen with clarity, you feel the touch, and they speak. This type of magic and mystery is called channeling. What is channeling? If you ask this question to 10 metaphysical beings, you'll get 10 different answers for the most part. To me, channeling is allowing other spirit energies for the most part to come into contact with and speak through you in a controlled, stable manner. This means you're making yourself a sort of gateway to allow God and Goddess, spirit beings, and otherworldly entities, if so desired, to mix their energy with yours and ultimately show you or speak to you messages and information that you in turn speak and tell others. Or if solo, attempting this, maybe record your messages in a journal, for instance. Like everything else in magic, this can be done by anyone. This is a birthright and is not beyond or above anyone's reach as a magical practice. Some of us are born with this ability greatly strengthened already, but most all of us have to exercise that muscle and make it stronger to achieve satisfactory results. Myself included, when I first started in witchcraft, I used to think some of the people I saw doing this were, well, embellishing a little or a lot about the things they were supposedly receiving. Until one Saturday night on September 8th, 2001, I was attending a standard Wiccan ritual with my mother coven, and my high priestess decided to perform a drawing down the moon ritual. I'll talk about this more a little later, but this is where a high priestess gives messages to her coven from the goddess through her mind and body. The message was given that a warrior from the east wielding a great fiery sword on horseback was traversing the seas, coming towards us with great fury and anger, full of destruction and death in his eyes, screaming and wailing like a banshee in the night. My high priestess was completely overwhelmed with this dread and negativity and broke down crying and literally collapsed in my high priest's arms and laid there crying for the next 5 minutes, completely intoxicated with emotional distress. Finally, she pulled herself together and we talked about the moment in the message amongst ourselves as a coven. We all decided that living in South Florida that we need to keep a strong eye out for the next possible hurricane, which I believe there may have been a few even brewing up at the time when this happened. We even spoke about maybe doing a little magic to help dissolve any severe weather systems that may have been hanging out between the United States East Coast and the African West Coast, as this is where the majority of the hurricanes come from, and this great fiery warrior barreling towards us from the east wielding a great sword of destruction and anger wasn't going to get us so easily, especially since this storm must be pretty serious considering the power and intensity of the message bestowed upon our most humble high priestess. So we all went home that night confident in keeping our eyes and ears open, watching the news for the next great storm to form over the seas and start heading our way as the systems have for centuries. Well, to our shock and surprise, we experienced this great warrior from the east, the fiery demon that wailed in the night like a banshee and caused mass destruction and death. But it was definitely no hurricane. It was, in fact, 3 days after her message was given, was the September 11th, 2001 attack on our Twin Towers in New York. The fiery warrior from the east was quite literal this time, unfortunately. After this, I knew at this point that this channeling of information was in fact very real and no joke. From that day on, I began to take these messages and channeling information much more serious. And of course, an emergency circle was called and magic performed appropriate for the situation at hand. Moving forward, I dabbled in channeling when given the opportunity, but it wasn't until I started my own Gardnerian coven in 2003 that I was able to really engage in this practice and start honing in on the specifics and really begin to exercise that talent that, again, we're all inherently born with. Slowly but surely tap into the energies that would feed my channeling skills today. So again, I myself had to really exercise and train myself to develop this magical skill, as most of us will. Just like working out your physical muscles, it's going to take some time and, more importantly, patience. But everyone here can do this. You can, I promise. And when you finally get it, it's going to change your life. To get a full understanding of what's going on, let's talk a little bit about the difference between some similar practices that often get lumped in with and confused with channeling. This is channeling or invocation, evocation, and possession. So, disclaimer, there are many different views on these three topics. What I'm about to teach you is my take on the subjects and the way I personally see it. So let's begin with channeling or invocation. This is when you call on an outside force to speak through you. This happens when that outside entity or energy shares its energy with your auric presence and connects with you, being able to feed you information in images, sounds, smells, and feelings, both emotional and physical. When you hear about a witch or a pagan performing an invocation of the god or goddess, or what is commonly called drawing down the god or goddess, this is what they're doing and talking about. They're calling the god or goddess energy into their presence and allowing their energies to mingle and share, making it possible to have a direct connect with that deity force and receive messages. These messages then are commonly shared with others if desired, and many times specific people are given very specific messages, almost like a divination practice, but more so a guidance delivered directly from the god or goddess themselves. This doesn't have to be a deity force. It can also be a spirit or entity of a lesser vibration, so to speak. And I know some of you are wondering, does this mean the entity or deity force goes inside your body? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say yes and no. It just depends on your specific circumstance. In my opinion, when I connect during channeling or invocation, it depends on the force or energy I'm calling. As for me, the gods, I believe, enter me because I can physically feel them, and I feel my auric field slightly shift to make room, so to speak. As for lesser entity vibrations, I feel like they more hold me, so to speak, but not necessarily enter my space to the degree of the deity force. I also believe this is myself unconsciously creating and putting into effect a sort of spiritual boundary and shield that will allow for communication, but not possession. And the reason I know this is because my messages from the gods are much stronger and more intimate than those from spirit entities and incarnate beings. Incarnate beings are entity vibrations that were never human, beings from other realms for existence. This natural shielding that I just spoke of is mostly unconscious. I don't have to try to do it, in other words, but I'm also extremely confident in my channeling practice, and I believe this confidence is also what helps me shield, for instance, from flat-out possession. In channeling and invocation, you're almost always in complete control of what's going on, and you can snap out of it anytime you wish. Let's segue into possession at this point. So possession is when this entity, whether incarnate or once living human spirit energy, will actually enter into your auric field and for the most part take control of your body and energy. You see this practice a lot in voodoo and other similar practices, especially in shamanic type practices and rituals of many cultures that embrace them. I've never experienced possession, nor do I ever want to, but this is just me. I like the fact that I'm in control of what happens, and I also like that I receive something from my sharing of energy. During possession, many times the possessed doesn't remember anything, and in fact becomes an entirely different physical presence, acting and speaking in a completely different manner than they usually are. A great example of this, if you're so inclined, I suggest watching the movie The Serpent and the Rainbow. It has great examples of possession as practiced by those of the voodoo tradition in Haiti. This possession causes the peoples to do physically amazing feats of strength and tolerance to pain and what have you that they normally would not be able to do in their normal spiritual state. So it's kind of like the entity kicks their spirit out of their body for a few minutes and takes over, shows off a little bit to show that they're there and what they can do, and then ultimately lets the spirit of the person back into their body to continue on with life in the norm. Most always during a ritual of possession, there are people who help the possessed through the ritual and sort of act as a guide and ringmaster to help control the spirits that are possessing the participants. Possession, I don't recommend it without a highly skilled practitioner to guide you and help you, as this can be a very dangerous practice and it's very, very real and practiced for centuries by many cultures. Finally, evocation. Evocation is the practice of calling an entity to your presence, but this entity is not coinciding with and entering into your auric or energy field. This practice has been utilized for centuries and is often mentioned in ancient grimoires throughout the ages. This is where a magician calls on an outside entity, usually a lower vibrational being such as a demon or something of the sorts, to the outside of a protectional circle and then attempts to physically communicate with it through the use of a black mirror or maybe incense smoke. In some common practice, this entity is actually conjured into a being in a small triangle drawn outside of the protective circle. The Lesser Key of Solomon, for instance, is a very common text that demonstrates just one type of evocational practice. These entities are called into being by the magician to either do a bidding for the magician or retrieve information for the magician. I myself have been a party to this practice, but I tend to mix this with channeling, which is very dangerous. But again, I'm very, very confident with working with these energies, so I don't mind sharing a little of the outside entity's essence to maintain a stronger connection, so to speak. I do not recommend you try this in the beginning, though. Like the old saying goes, never conjure that which you cannot dispel. Many witches have a common evocation practice that is very much like this ceremonial magic practice, but it involves conjuring up their familiar, spirit familiars, and working with these entities in the same manner, only on a much more personal level. Anyhow, now that I've discussed the differences between the three most common forms of spirit and deity communication, let's get on to how you can practice working with channeling and invocation. For starters, it's a great practice to build your magical muscles, as discussed in this video above and also linked in the description below. Meditation, visualization, grounding, and centering are the key to working out these magical muscles, so I strongly recommend you check out that video and practice these exercises at least a few times a week, just like you would go to the gym a few times a week in order to physically better your health. These practices better your magical health, so to speak. So, in the beginning, this is a very tricky practice, mainly because you yourself build boundaries and put up mental blockades with self-doubt and low magical self-esteem. Channeling is your birthright. We're all born with this ability, and you do possess it too. You just don't realize it because society's conditioned you to believe that these things are nonsense and a waste of practical time. I promise you, you can do this. You just have to practice. Like everything else in life, you have to practice. It took me years to be fluent with channeling, but I also didn't really have a guide to help me out. I kind of had a person put me on the path, and I figured out the rest through trial and error. Let me help lessen your trial and error phase. There are two methods to beginning and working with your channeling skills. The first method is the harder method, but unfortunately the most commonly used method, as it's the most convenient. So for the first method, find a nice and comfortable spot where you can be alone and without interruption. It's really great in the beginning to have a tone in the background. In fact, many people channel without even knowing it while in the shower or anywhere where there's a low constant vibration and or tone washing out the background in their surroundings. I've included such a tone in the description below that you can download. It lasts for exactly 10 minutes, which is plenty of time to achieve your goal. Now, if you can and you're of age to do so, it also helps quite a bit to take a shot or two of, whiskey or whatever you might, take the edge off, or whatever natural herb you may possess and burn to kind of take the edge off when doing this. It's not necessary by any means, but it can really help make the process much easier to accomplish our goals. I'm not saying get trashed, by the way, as that will definitely work against our activity at hand. Just take the edge off. This is a very common practice amongst shamanic tribes and has been for centuries. Even the ancient Greeks and Romans, along with many other Mediterranean cultures, had their famous oracles that would enter a trance-like state with the help of certain herbs and incense to divine and invoke messages. Anyways, sit and close your eyes. Just relax. Consciously clear your mind. Ask the god and the goddess to give you a message. You can easily do this by simply asking in your mind. Now, take 4 deep breaths to a rhythmic 4 count. In, 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, do this 4 times. After your 4th breath, just sit and breathe normally. Now, clear your mind. You see nothing at this point. Now, slowly, an image will begin to come into your mind's eye. See this image and speak it out loud. If you see a vision of a cactus alone in a windy desert, literally speak it out, explain it out loud. I see a cactus alone in a very windy desert. The sand is blowing to and fro. The sun feels so hot and the air is dry, and I can feel the sand brush against my skin as the wind blows. After a few moments, and you're content that the gods have shown you whatever the present image was, then let it wash away. Let it fade away, back to a clear mind. Another image will come into your mind's eye. Do the same thing here. Speak it out loud. This practice of describing what you're seeing out loud helps you to connect deeper with the energy that is feeding your psychic mind. This is practicing this technique. After you've received your messages, the trick is to now translate them into what they meant. You see, most all spirit communications will always come as images in the beginning. It's very rare that you hear voices in your ears or get smells or touches. It always starts from darkness, no mind. It's always dark in the beginning. This is your clean slate, so to speak, for the spirit or deity to write on, and this is done through imagery and pictures put into your mind. How do you know the difference between an authentic communication and just a thought that your mind is developing as it does 1,000 times a day? If when you clear your mind, the first thing that comes to your head is something in your mundane life, for instance, the meeting at work tomorrow, your crotchety neighbor, the way your car jiggled on the highway driving home, your pain in the ass boy/girlfriend, this is most likely not a message from an entity. This means your monkey mind chatter is too great and you need to strengthen that a little more. Let that mind chatter happen, and as it does, let it wash away and dissolve back into no mind, that blank slate. You may keep getting these worries and jumbled monkey mind visions. If so, that's okay, because you're training your mind to shut the hell up and dissolve this monkey mind away with time and make way for clear and message-filled communicative visions. It might just take some time. Be patient. You can do this. I promise you can do it. If you do get a vision that is simply random and not tied directly with your life stresses and complications, and this, in fact, is a clear communication and message being transmitted to you. As I mentioned, speak it aloud. When you feel you've gotten a message or two, slowly and confidently open your eyes and write down what you saw. Now you need to translate what this message may have meant to you. This is again a training exercise and a discipline. Pick out each image and circumstance and relate it to how it makes you feel and what you think the message from the entity was trying to tell you or reveal to you. This is the hardest but most important part. So what does all this add up to in the end? After a while, you'll be able to go into this subtle trance-like state at will. You'll develop a trigger, so to speak, that will bring you to this state of mind within ritual, for instance, or channeling for another person. Let me take you through my personal experience of what happens when I invoke or channel for my coven when I draw down the God in any given circle. My high priestess calls down the God force through me. I relax for a few moments, I clear my mind. Upon clearing my mind, this is my trigger that I'm ready to open and receive. I literally make myself an empty vessel and focus all of my energy and mind to receiving a message in whatever form it may come. At this point, I begin to feel the hair stand up on my arms and legs. A slight chill goes down my spine and through my body. At this point, I know I've made a connection. Next, physically, I can feel the top of my head start to vibrate. I can't really explain it any other way, and that vibration basically shoots down my body from head to toe and then oscillates back up again, creating a constant vibration. I can feel literally oscillating up and down through my body. It's like getting chills, but different in that it's like electricity flowing up and down. It's really like nothing else I've ever felt outside of channeling, so it's a little difficult for me to compare it to anything else to help explain it. Once I feel this, I know it's going to be a doozy of a message. It always starts with an image, maybe like the desert scene I described above, playing like a movie in my mind's eye. At this point, I would either describe the scene to my coven or I would begin to translate what I'm seeing. For instance, instead of describing the desert scene, I might say instead, you are alone. The times seem hard right now, desperate. Challenges are around every corner. The path you're currently on is exhausting at times. Keep going, don't give up. Your oasis is in the distance. Be patient and tread softly. You see, I took the desert vision and translated it into what I felt the imagery really meant. Now, one of my covenanters will most definitely connect with that message, or myself connect for that matter, and utilize the information given, and maybe it'll help guide them through their present frustrations. The messages are just as much positive messages and messages of challenge, but always messages to help guide those who are engaged and attentive enough to listen. Also, small warning, when you do connect, it can be very, very emotional. It's the weirdest thing. It's not like you're sad or anything like that. You begin to cry a lot of times. Most of the times, this happens when invoking a god or goddess. It doesn't happen so much when calling on lower vibrational entities, which, by the way, in the beginning, work with your god and goddess only. Don't work with these other entities until you have a firm grasp and experience in doing this. I would say 3 out of 5 times when drawing down the god, I end up losing it and the tears start rolling. It just happens. I don't know why. In fact, if you have any ideas as to why this may happen, let me know in the comments below. And it's not just me. I know many fellow witches that have mastered this technique and the same thing happens to them too. It's a very emotional experience. So for me personally, once I get going, the images give way to words being given to me to speak. Again, this is very hard to explain because it's not that I'm hearing words to speak or even seeing words to speak in my mind's eye. I just start speaking words and messages. Not in control of what's coming out of my mouth. I am literally just listening listening myself in a way, listening to what is coming through me. I just let it flow and let it happen. It's the weirdest, most unique experience I've ever worked with in my life. It's like being out of control, but at the same time, I'm completely in control and can make it stop anytime I want. And this is where I mentioned earlier that this is going to be my hardest video to try and express because these techniques and practices I'm trying to explain as best I can have to ultimately be experienced in order to receive the full effect of what I'm trying to explain. Regardless, I'm doing the best I can and I hope I don't totally confuse you all. Anyways, I mentioned the second technique earlier that I haven't described yet. This second technique involves yourself and the partner of the opposite sex. The same practice is done as described earlier, only a friend or lover of the opposite sex, someone you can trust, sits in front of you and holds your hands and acts as a conduit to help pull the god or goddess energy into you. They're simply there to sit in silence and not be a distraction of any sorts. They are literally being utilized as a sort of battery, positive and negative, masculine and feminine. Most all drawing downs are performed in this manner when working in a group setting. If a male is drawing down the god, a woman will help pull that energy down and through. When a woman is drawing down the goddess, a man will help pull that energy down and through. Again, like a battery works when there's a positive and negative channel to let the energy flow, creating power. Same thing, only the negative and positive now becomes the feminine and masculine. It's a very powerful practice, this second technique, and I recommend everyone give it a shot at least once, as your messages and clarity are doubled and tripled utilizing this method. And it has nothing to do with sexual preference, but everything to do with masculine and feminine energy flow that every one of us is born with and possesses. Finally, once you've finished your communication, you're definitely 100% going to want to ground and center, or at least ground. This can be done by simply placing your hands on the ground and imagining all excess energy to be dissipated into the earth. This can also be done simply by, which is my favorite way to do it, simply eating something. If you did work with a partner, then hug that person. Let it be a really good lengthy hug of 15 seconds or more, not the buddy hug, pat on the back bullshit. And hug heart to heart, which will mean placing your head to the right of their head, which is awkward but better as your hearts are now beating on top of one another, not to the side like most of us hug in general. So to wrap this up, this is definitely a more advanced switch into working, but I really felt it was important to talk about because it brings a lot of my previous lessons to full circle and explains why we do some of the meditation, visualization, grounding and centering techniques and whatnot, like I explained in your magical muscles video I mentioned earlier. And also, these techniques go above and beyond channeling to give messages via drawing downs, as when I do divination for people, I literally channel the information to them. I started off my divination practice using tarot cards, which I will still do from time to time, but in reality, when I divine for someone, I'll hold their hands and channel the messages that they were meant to hear. Even if I use tarot cards, they're literally for show for the most part when I use them. I end up channeling the information I give to the person. I will tell the person what the card means, but then put my hand on the card, close my eyes, and channel the rest of the message. Sometimes I don't need to close my eyes, and I'll just have such a connection with the quorant's energy that it'll just flow like water with the flip of each card. Eventually, you also start to channel out of nowhere, driving down the road or taking a shower or sitting drinking your coffee. You'll start to realize the difference of when you're channeling and just creatively thinking, as channeling is usually random and unfocused thought that hits you like a ton of bricks and grabs you like a tornado until you grasp it back and make a pact to recognize it for what it's worth. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch Into Working. I pray to the gods that I didn't confuse the hell out of you, as this is a pretty heavy and intense subject to go over. But regardless, you all know I'm here to answer any questions you might have. This channel's currently still in its beginning stages, so I've been able to keep up with many of the back channel questions you all have been asking, and replying to a lot of the questions as well in the little chat thingy below the videos. I can imagine there will come a time when this is not possible anymore, so take advantage while you can. Do you have any experiences or comments about channeling or invocation? Have you ever been part of or witnessed a drawing down the moon/goddess or sun/god? Let us all know in the comments below, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel and ring that little bell to remind you of future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Until next time, blessed be.